It is May the 23rd, 2017, and I have a college student on the phone who called with some questions, some things he's being taught in school. Do you care to give your name there, sir? Or at least your first name?
My name is Jackson Wheat.
Jackson, okay.
And I'm from Shreveport.
And you are in school, and are they teaching you evolution?
Yes, sir. Evolution is one of the class evolution is a junior course. We get an introduction to it in the second semester of freshman year.
Okay. Well, thank you, Jackson, for letting me record this for our YouTube listeners, and maybe it'll help some other people. You had some very interesting, perfectly fair questions. I hate to make you do this, but would you like to start over which questions you had, and I'll be able to give my answer to them.
Okay, that's perfectly fine. So I think we both agree that natural selection happens and that it only selects from the existing genetic pool and doesn't add itself any genetic material.
Correct. Yeah, on my video number 4 of my seminar series, I talk about that. Natural selection simply selects. Suppose you decided you want to create a population of people 30 feet tall. So you're going to kill everybody. Right. You're going to kill everybody under 30 feet tall, which would be everybody, and you now have wiped out humanity. And you can't create a population of people 30 feet tall because there aren't any 30-footers to select from. However, if you wanted to create a population of people that are 7 feet tall or more, you probably could do that. Go around the world, find all the 7-footers, and everybody else, you kill them, and let those 7-footers breed. And out of their children, a large percentage may be over 7 feet, and so then you kill those under 7. You do that 3 or 4 or 5 generations in a row, and you now have a population of 7-footers. This is what farmers do with their cows or their corn or their soybeans or anything. They select a particular trait that they want, and they select it out of the population. But as you mentioned, and as I mentioned to you on our previous call, they're not creating anything. They're only selecting a slice of existing gene code. So natural selection proves creation. I think it proves that the Creator designed his creatures with the ability to produce a wide range of offspring, so some will survive in any given environment. Anyway, so go ahead.
Okay, so I like the analogy of what farmers use, so I'll go with that one. So we look at corn, for instance. Natural corn is teosint, right?
Uh-huh.
It's small. It's very hard. It's not very edible. Well, I mean, to some people it might be edible, but to me it's not.
Right.
But the farmers grew our modern commercialized corn ultimately from teosint, but they didn't grow the corn simply through natural selection alone, because there were no teosint that are like our commercialized corn. So they had to capitalize on mutations as well as natural or as artificial selection in that case to produce the modern variation of corn that we have in commercialized business.
Correct.
So for artificial selection, whether it's corn or bananas or strawberries or what have you, it's a matter of capitalizing on not just the selection process, but also the mutation.
Correct.
That add something, maybe a little bit of size, maybe a little bit of flavor, or extra kernels of corn, whatever. And so you do agree that mutations, or that there are mutations that allow us to evolve these corn or strawberries or whatever.
No, I would be cautious going down that trail. The corn, they're selecting for size. If they get a mutant that is now larger size, okay, is that new information, or is that the same information gone haywire? There's no new. The corn didn't turn into a strawberry or banana or elephant. It is still corn. It's still recognizable as corn. So I don't think the mutation actually added anything. It accentuated something that was already existing. So I don't think that process is going to offer any hope to those who want all of humans to come from rocks over 4.6 billion years.
Okay.
Okay.
I think.
Well, let me point out one more thing, Jackson. One more thing.
Go ahead.
One more thing. This corn that they have produced, and I grew up in Illinois corn country. Believe me, we were surrounded by miles of corn. The corn is A, still corn. B, it is less resistant to diseases. You have to babysit it and spray it with all kinds of stuff. And it turned loose into the wild, it would very quickly revert in a couple generations, if it survived at all. It would revert back to the native original corn. So this is not something that is going to work in nature. It might work in a farm or in a laboratory where they can babysit it and keep it alive, but it has lost its disease resistance, it's lost its resilience, it's lost its toughness. I think there's a couple of other phrases that farmers will use for plants that are able to survive, without their help. So that example, if it were true that the corn has indeed evolved or mutated and created something new, if it were true, and I'm not saying it is, that is only one of about 40 quadrillion examples you would have to come up with to turn a rock to a human over 4.6 billion years.
Okay, so I think, and it's probably my fault, but I think we are talking about two different types of mutations. I think we're on two different sort of wavelengths when we talk about this.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, I agree with you completely when you say that it's built upon, that mutations are built upon the existing genetic material. I completely agree. Elephants don't, just come out of rocks magically or what have you. I agree.
Right.
But every variation, every mutation is adding to what's already there. And so when we pull those away, when we look at these mutations, over time we see a sort of family tree arising from these mutations, or from pulling them away. We see, okay, this mutation resulted in this lineage, and we see this mutation resulted in some other lineage. And so I agree, they are starting with a pre-existing material, but they are still adding information, I guess.
Well, that's where I would disagree. I don't think, this is a fairy tale that people tell. This is a story, but it's not observed in nature. We don't observe mutations add information that it's useful and then succeed in passing it on to the next generations. We don't see that in nature. So it's not really science. It's more of a religion. It's something people believe in, and they believe in it very strongly. And I have to admire their faith. But it's not science. Whatever it is, science is things we can see and test and observe and study and demonstrate. So it's not science. It is a story. It's if you give it enough time, it might happen. Well, okay. We've had farmers raising cows and pigs and corn and chickens and everything else for generations, thousands of years. And all we've ever seen is chickens produce chickens and cows produce cows. And if you get a mutation that's too far from normal, it dies. The second problem you have is if you did get a beneficial mutation, like you're mentioning here, I don't think there's an example of one. But if there was one, now you got a gigantic problem of who does this one marry? You got to get two mutations, identical, in the opposite sex, at the same time, in the same place. They got to find each other and be interested.
Well, that's not really how sex works. But it's not so much about two getting the same mutation at the same time. It's about one. Mutations are very incremental, and so a mutation that isn't within a certain range of incrementalness, whatever, is going to kill the organism, which is why we have all these mutations that are lethal, because they cause too much of a negative change in this organism. But that's right. So I want to go back to this idea of information. can you give me a definition of that word? Does that just mean genes?
Well,
it just means gene?
The English language is based upon a code of 26 letters called the 26 letters of the alphabet. If you had mutations in your writing, if you were writing down in English and every once in a while you get a mutation, a misspelling, how long would it take that process of getting mutations or typographical errors or misspellings to turn your sentence into Russian or Chinese or Korean? Well, it won't happen. It doesn't happen. It can't.
I mean, we can... I'm sorry.
Well, it's based on a different code. See, adding letters or deleting letters or transposing letters in a sentence, as an example of a mutation, is not going to add new information, especially if anything wrong or negative is eliminated right away. And there certainly seems to be a process in nature called natural selection, where anything that isn't the best or toughest or strongest is going to be naturally eliminated. It's not going to survive. If the sheep can't run as fast as the rest of the sheep, well, then the wolf is going to catch him first. So he doesn't get to pass on his genes to the next generation. I don't think that mutations are incremental. I mean, you can imagine that if you want, but that's not science. It's something people imagine happening, and they tell stories about it, and they say, well, what if, and what if, and it's not science. Whatever it is, it's a religion, I think.
Okay. So I guess we'll talk about the. You mentioned languages as you're talking about mutation. Well, we can actually see the evolution of languages. We can see the evolution from Latin to Old Castilian, which is the colloquialism of Latin, or colloquial language of Latin, to Spanish, for instance. And we can see the evolution, if you want to call it that, in such works as Don Quixote, which has elements of both Old Castilian, which is the Latin colloquial language, and Spanish.
Sure.
So we can see...
Hold on. Let me give my input on that so far, and then you can go on. That is a poor example of using the word evolution, because that didn't happen by itself. There were a lot of intelligent people over the centuries who were making those changes. People in the last 100 years have come up with thousands of brand new words. I don't know that the word computer was in any dictionary 200 years ago. I don't think the word automobile was in any dictionary 100 years ago or 150 years ago. So, yes, our English language is evolving, if that's what you mean, but it's happening as a result of a lot of intelligent, or sometimes not so intelligent, input. So the Latin slowly evolving or morphing into the Spanish or any of the modern Romance languages, this is not happening by itself. It's happening because of intelligent input. That is not an example of what might happen in nature to turn a frog to a prince, or to turn a rock to a prince, which is what evolution really teaches. I mean, ultimately, you have to start with a rock. 4.6 billion years ago, the Earth cooled down. It was a hard, rocky crust. It rained on the rocks for millions of years, turned them into soup, and the soup came alive. And that first life form slowly became humans. I mean, that is exactly what the story says. I've got the textbooks. I'm surrounded by a library of these textbooks that teach that. So,
I believe you.
The changes that we see from Latin to Spanish is A, not going to help for the evolution of living forms. B, it's an example of intelligent input causing this to happen. Like the automobile turning into from the Model T to the Lincoln Continental. Well, that didn't happen by itself. A whole lot of engineers designed things and made them better. So that was an example of creation and intelligence. So I'm sorry, go ahead, I interrupted.
No, that's fine. Well, I was just making the analogy with language.
Right.
That wasn't meant to be as, like this is a dead...
A proof. It's not a proof.
Example of evolution. So I was just making an analogy. As for the mutations, they are incremental. Everyone has approximately 130 mutations in their zygote alone, and the majority of these are neutral. That is, they don't express themselves, and this is understood in Kimura's neutral theory or neutral theory of mutation, I believe it's called. And so when we look, when we look at evolution over the billions of years, when we look at it in retrospect, and it seems kind of difficult to imagine that, the single-celled organism eventually unconsciously gave rise to multicellular organisms and then to fish, amphibians, etc. But we have to realize, looking at that in retrospect, in every generation throughout evolutionary time, there was no conscious foresight of what any organism is going to turn into. Every organism was just going through mutation, natural selection, and speciation, and it ultimately resulted in us as well as all the other organisms.
Well, now, hold on. No. You think it ultimately did that. You don't know that. That is how the story goes, but that's not science. Nobody saw this happen. Nobody sees it happen today. It is a religious teaching that single-celled organisms became humans over slow periods of time, over billions and billions of years. That is certainly what you're being taught, and that is what you voiced here, but that is not part of science. It's part of a religion that you believe in. And it may be true, but even if it's true, it's not part of science in this case. It's an example of something that can't be observed and studied and tested. It's a story. It's a fairy tale, I think. Now, let me make 2 points here before you go on. Single-celled organisms changing to multi-celled. Are you aware of any 2 or 3 or 4 or 5-celled organisms that survive, other than a colony where each organism is doing the same thing? Are there any 2-celled organisms in the universe that you're aware of, or that anybody's aware of, or 3-celled or 4-celled? And I can answer the question by saying nobody's found one yet. I think the simplest life form that has multiple functions is about probably maybe 200 cells working together. So where are the 2-celled or the 3-celled or the 4-celled? I mean, the human body is probably 100 trillion cells working together to do the functions that we do. So to say it went from single cell to multicellular is great to say. Those words roll off the tongue easily, but it's not science.
Okay. And what's your second point?
Now, secondly, you mentioned that we have 130 mutations in our zygote. I don't know that that's true, but let's assume that it is. I think it's more than that.
Okay.
None of these mutations are helpful that anybody's aware of. And if you marry too close to your own bloodline, like your sister or mother or daughter, you're probably going to have deformed children, because now the chances of those 130 mutations lining up are much greater, which is why most states have laws, banning anything closer than second cousin marriages. I think 3 states allow first cousin marriages, but because it creates problems. So that's just, I would say that's a proof, a demonstration that the mutations that are happening are not helpful. They're harmful. And so gradually they get weeded out of the population by virtue of the fact that we don't marry our sister. Okay. That would be the dominant and recessive genes that you learn in high school biology, that gradually things can be weeded out. If there's a mistake in your genetic code, and it's a really complicated code, and the copying process is phenomenal, the way DNA replicates, it's just like mind-boggling how this could happen. But it could be like a computer code or a language or anything else, and there simply are no examples of it being beneficial, and certainly plenty of examples of it being harmful or fatal. Go ahead.
Okay. So I guess I wrote down kind of 3 things while you were talking. The first thing you said was that I just want to make sure that these are correct before I talk about them. I don't want to misrepresent what you're saying.
Okay.
You said science is direct observation and experimentation.
The definition of science needs to be agreed on before you go too far in a debate like this, but I think most dictionaries would list science from the word seer, which is the Latin, means to know. What do we know? And how do we know it? Well, we know things that we can observe, study, test, and demonstrate. That would be observational science. Now, there's another type called historical science. I know Abe Lincoln was President of the United States, even though I can't see him. So the historical science is not as credible, I guess, as observational science, but it's still credible up to a degree. But evolution is neither of those. It's not something we know. We don't know that animals turn to any other kind of animals. We know there are cows and bananas in the world today. I think that is part of science. We know that. We do not know that they had a common ancestor that was a single-celled organism, 3 billion years ago. We don't know that. We can think that if we want. We can believe that if we want. We can believe it very strongly. And we might be able to convince millions of other people to believe it. But that's not science. It's a religion in every sense of the word. So yes, I did give that definition of science, and I think if you look up any dictionary, unless they changed it in the new ones, go back and get some. I got some old ones here in the library. I think. Okay, go ahead.
A systematic knowledge of the physical world gained through observation and experimentation. Would you say that's a fair definition?
That is typically a definition that's given, something like that. Systematic. It's the accumulation of knowledge gained by observation, experimentation, testing.
All right. Okay. Good. Okay. So would you consider inference part of the scientific method?
Yes, we can certainly infer things. Okay, but you start to lose certainty. I can tap on a block of wood and infer that it's probably solid wood all the way through. But I may, cut it in half and find out, oh no, it actually has, a hollow spot in it. Until I actually do scientific experiments, I wouldn't be able to say that my inference is the same as observational science. It may be, but we can infer what's inside the Earth by the S&P waves from earthquakes and tsunamis and things like that. How the waves travel through the crust of the Earth. I think it's a very reasonable inference and is probably true, but it doesn't rise to the level of first-class, provable, demonstrable science.
Okay. Okay. Well, let me see. Okay, so we agree on the definition of science. We agree that science is about observation, experimentation, and inference. Those are all important to understanding the world. Okay, so in that case, I'd like to say that the reason that I accept that evolution has happened it's not because I was raised in an area where evolution is exceptionally supported, I guess. I mean, I was raised in Louisiana. There are creationists in my family. I've actually got several creationist books, believe it or not. One by Lee Strobel. I've got Did Man Get Here by Evolution or by Creation? From was it 1969, I think it is. And so I came to my understanding of evolution because of the inferences that can be drawn from all of the observational and experiments. And so these observation experiments come from biogeography, the fossil record, phobology, geology, embryology.
Hold on. Slow down. Before you list all these, let's go take them one at a time. You're saying you came to this.
I was just making a point about those are what have pushed me to accept evolution, but we don't have to get into those.
No. I think you named them. I think we need to take them one at a time. Because
I still wanted to get to the points you mentioned earlier about multicellular organisms and human mutation.
Okay, but if you studied embryology or fossil record, etc., and those led you to the conclusion, I don't know if you've seen my video series or not, but I point out.
No, sir, I haven't.
Okay, there is no such thing as a fossil record. It doesn't exist. There are fossils, bazillions of fossils in the ground. That's not a question. But it's not a record. None of them talk, and none of them have a date. None of them have a date stamped on them. So somebody else is telling the story about what happened to form these fossils. Now, the story they're telling may be true, or it may not be true. But there is no such thing as a fossil record. There are bones in the dirt, lots of them. But that doesn't mean that we can tell exactly what happened. And I point out, in a court of law, no fossils would count as evidence for evolution, because you can't prove that one had any children. When you find bones in the dirt, all you really know is it died. You don't know it had any children that lived, or it had any children at all. So In a court of law, in an honest court of law, all fossil evidence would be thrown out. Their fossil records would say, I object, that doesn't prove anything. Yep, I agree. And they wouldn't allow it as evidence for evolution. Embryology, they're probably teaching you in school that the baby growing inside the mother has gill slits, and they go through the pharyngeal gill arches. That was proven wrong in 1874, but they're still teaching it in schools, and sadly, it sounds like you got taught that. My video number four, which you can see on drdino.com, just watch seminar part 4, Lies in the Textbooks. And I've got a whole section in there showing about embryology, how it was made up in 1869, proven wrong in proven wrong 5 years later, but they still teach it. I've got biology books, let's see, right behind me here. I can grab one. They're still teaching this, even though it's been proven wrong 130 years ago. It's not true.
Okay, so on that, I think you're confusing the drawing that Haeckel did, where he exaggerated the pharyngeal arches for. I actually have a biology textbook right here, Campbell 9th edition, where it's got micrograph pictures of these embryos. I mean, they didn't make up the micrograph pictures.
No, that I agree. I might have. I don't know if I have Campbell's 9th edition or not, but I'm looking around my library here. I've got Campbell's. There it is over there. I'm not sure which edition it is. Okay, it is true that many creatures, as they develop in the mother, have what would be considered folds of skin under what is going to become the head. That is true. Okay, I have folds of skin in my elbow when I bend it. Also, I cannot breathe through them.
I think that's kind of a mischaracterization of what these things are. What the textbooks aren't saying is that these are gill arches. It's saying these are homologous to the gill arches in fish. These pharyngeal gill arches in us, or pharyngeal arches, whatever you want to call them, they developed into our face, part of our neck, etc., our larynx, but they're homologous to the things that develop into gills in fish.
Right. Let me explain that. Homologous, homo means same. Homologous means this looks like it might be the same thing. Okay. Well, I would say a watermelon and a what's that game they play? Rugby. A rugby ball look very similar. They're homologous. But
no, that's not what.
Yes, it is.
Homologous means homologous is, you look at the fingernails, for instance. We have fingernails. All primates have fingernails. There are some strepsirrhines that have claws also, and they're kind of weird. But all primates have fingernails, and we all derive our fingernails, which are homologous, from a common ancestor.
No. Stop. Jackson, stop right there. Could it be we all have fingernails because we have a common designer? Why would you say a common ancestor? That is not evidence of a common ancestor. Toyotas and Chevys have bumpers. Wow, that proves they all evolved from a skateboard. No, it doesn't. It's a common design. It meets a necessary function. You have bumpers on your car. You have fingernails on your fingers, so you can do things. You can scratch things and open things. The fingernails are very handy. I'm glad I've got some. But that's not proof of a common ancestor. Whoever taught you that lied to you. It is true. It is true. We all have similar structures. Now that I would agree with. But it is not true that that's evidence for evolution. I think that's evidence of the same creator created us.
Okay, so I've got two things to say, and I'll say them, and then I guess you can address them. The first thing, your point of comparison is something that you know is created by humans versus something you know isn't created by humans. So I think that's kind of a false analogy. Secondarily, you said, is it possible that it is a common creator? Well, yes, it's possible that it was a common creator. I'm not going to get into about what that creator was like or anything like that. Mm-hmm. But if we assume it was a common creator, then why did that creator create some differences in some organisms and some differences in other organisms? Why not just create all organisms the same?
Okay.
What is the reason?
Let me take the second question first. The reason I would say that the Creator made these similarities is we have similar things to do in life. We have two eyes, so do the apes. That's so we can get binocular vision to judge distances. A creature with one eye is certainly handicapped. They can't have depth perception, and it would be a hindrance. So there may be some creatures like an octopus that can survive just fine with one in their little world. But they're designed to fit whatever their duty is going to be in life. The differences then would be for the same reason. Let's see, you could design a Chevy pickup truck or a Chevy van. They have thousands of similarities, probably thousands of interchangeable parts, because they came from the same designer. But there are also some differences between a pickup truck and a van because they have different functions. The apes have to climb trees. I don't. Not apes. I'm sorry, monkeys. Monkeys have to climb trees to survive. I don't. So they have a prehensile tail and a grasping rear foot, which I do not have, and you don't either. You can't grab a tree branch with your feet and hang on upside down by it. So monkeys have to live they're designed to live in their world, which is mostly up in the trees, arboreal, and we are not. So the similarities could be attributed to a common designer, and the differences could be attributed to a common designer. I don't see any problem with that.
Kind of a heads I win, tails you lose situation?
Well, I think in a court of law, see, since you are asking, or the evolutionists, I should say, aren't asking nothing, they're demanding that their view be taught at taxpayer expense to all the kids. The burden of proof is on them. It's not on me. I'm not asking for my view to be taught. So it's not heads I win, tails you lose. The fact is, the similarities and differences could be a common ancestor or could be a common creator. So why are all of us paying for the common ancestor theory to be taught? A, that's not fair. B, that's not common sense. I don't think we should have public schools at all, but if we're going to have them, then certainly don't promote one person's religion over another. And the idea that we have a common ancestor because we all have fingernails, that is a religious belief. That is not scientifically observable. Monkeys are still producing babies, and they still have fingernails. And humans are still producing babies, and they still have fingernails. But we never see anything changing even closely toward the other kind. Apes produce apes, monkeys produce monkeys, gorillas produce gorillas, humans produce humans, squirrels produce squirrels. There are no exceptions. None.
Okay. So one thing, I didn't say that common ancestry is proved because we have fingernails. I was just using that as an example. There are lots of other examples I could use.
Right.
And the point that I was making is that we have all these similarities with other apes, and we have similarities with monkeys, and we have similarities with mammals.
I agree.
And we also have similarities with reptiles and amphibians and fish, and we even have similarities with prokaryotic unicellular organisms.
Oh, sure.
And so when you look at the wealth of similarities, this hierarchy forms, and that hierarchy, just based on the morphological characteristics alone, is in the vast majority of cases shown to be true by genetics.
Okay.
We use morphology, and we also use genetics, and in a lot of cases, not in all cases, I'll grant you, but in the vast majority of cases, they give us the same picture. We share 98% of our, 97% of our DNA with chimpanzees. We also share the exact same amount of endogenous retroviruses with chimpanzees, and we both have the broken monkey gene for making citrate. It's called a gulo. Mm-hmm. It's broken in us, but it's not broken, and also in other apes, but not in monkeys. And so this hierarchy of genetics and morphology starts to line up, and so that's where, or at least that's partially where, the phylogenetic tree arises. And so that's what I have to say on.
Okay, hold on 1 second here. If you don't mind, I'd like to. So my YouTubes are not much more than 30 minutes. Let me stop and start a new one.